The small-town courthouse had never felt so alive. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, cutting across the polished wooden floors in golden streaks and bouncing off the brass fixtures in the room. The familiar smell of old books, varnish, and faint traces of coffee mingled in the air, creating an oddly comforting atmosphere for those who came here often. Yet today, the usual quiet dignity of the courtroom was replaced by a gentle hum of anticipation. Journalists with notepads and cameras jostled for the best spots, their whispered questions mixing with the rustle of papers and the shuffle of shoes across the hardwood floors. The townspeople, friends and neighbors of both the victim and the accused, filled the benches, murmuring among themselves in soft tones, exchanging quick glances and quiet speculations. In the center of all this activity sat 3-year-old Emily, perched on her mother's lap. Her legs dangled just above the polished floor, and her tiny hands gripped the edge of the bench nervously. Her mother, Sarah, kept a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder, subtly reassuring her while scanning the room with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Emily's dark brown eyes, wide with innocence and wonder, darted back and forth, taking in everything around her. The shiny gavel on the judge's desk, the black leather-bound books stacked high on the shelves, the anxious expressions on the faces of people she didn't know. She didn't understand much about courtrooms or legal proceedings, but she could feel the tension, the energy, and most importantly, she noticed the dog. At the front of the courtroom, a tall German shepherd stood alert beside his handler, Officer Daniels. His name was Rex, and even among seasoned officers, he was known as more than just a police dog. His sleek coat gleamed under the fluorescent lights, muscles taut yet composed, exuding the perfect balance of power and discipline. His ears flicked slightly with every sound, the soft cough of a journalist, the creak of a bench, the shuffle of the defendant's shoes. He was calm, but his presence was commanding, and every person in the room instinctively gave him space. Emily's gaze locked onto him the moment he entered. Emily's fascination was immediate, magnetic. She reached out a tiny hand, pointing without a word, her eyes never leaving Rex. Sarah noticed, smiling softly. "Do you like the dog, sweetie?" she whispered, her voice gentle enough not to interrupt the proceedings. Emily only nodded, her lips pressed together in concentration, her tiny brow furrowed ever so slightly as she tried to understand the importance of the dog before her. There was a purity in her interest, an unfiltered, instinctive recognition of something heroic. For a child, Rex was more than a trained animal. He was a figure of awe, a living embodiment of bravery and strength. Around them, the courtroom staff prepared for the case. Bailiffs moved quietly, ensuring everything was in place. The judge, a tall, middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and sharp eyes, adjusted his robe and glanced over his glasses, surveying the room. He knew Rex would be part of the proceedings today, and he was aware of the unusual dynamic that often occurred when a K-9 unit was present. Courtrooms were serious places, but the presence of a hero dog could bring out unexpected emotions, especially from young spectators. The defendant, a man in his late 20s, sat nervously in his seat. His lawyer leaned close, whispering quietly, trying to instill a sense of calm, but the tension in the man's shoulders betrayed his anxiety. He was accused of a string of burglaries in the neighborhood, crimes that had unsettled the town and drawn the attention of both media and law enforcement. The case had been solved largely because of Rex. It was Rex who had tracked the suspect through dense brush, through dark alleys, and across muddy fields after the alarm had been triggered. Without the dog's keen sense of smell and disciplined training, the trail might have gone cold and justice might have been delayed. Emily, oblivious to the specifics, was entirely focused on Rex. She tilted her head, studying him as he sat patiently beside Officer Daniels. There was something mesmerizing in the way his eyes followed the people around him, alert yet calm. She could feel that he was special, though she didn't understand why. Children have a remarkable ability to recognize heroism in ways adults sometimes overlook. While the courtroom's adults were focused on procedure, arguments, and evidence, Emily simply observed and absorbed the essence of Rex, the courage, the calm authority, and the sense of safety he radiated. Journalists noticed her as well. Cameras shifted, angles adjusted, and a few reporters whispered softly to one another. "Look at the little girl," one murmured. "She's completely captivated." Another nodded, already envisioning a heartwarming human interest angle, the child and the police dog, innocence and bravery colliding in a quiet yet profound moment. While legal arguments would dominate the news stories, it was clear that Emily's fascination would steal the spotlight in a way that no one could have predicted. The air in the courtroom was thick with a mixture of tension and curiosity. The judge called the session to order, and the rustle of papers was replaced with the soft sound of attentive silence. Bailiffs took their positions, cameras adjusted to avoid obstructing the official proceedings, and Officer Daniels gave Rex a quiet command. The dog shifted slightly, settling his weight onto his paws, his eyes still tracking Emily. There was a gentle tension in the room, a mix of professional seriousness and the unpredictability of what might happen next. Emily leaned a little closer to her mother, her tiny hand still pointing at Rex. She didn't speak, but her expression was intense, as if she were on the verge of saying something important. Her mother smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face. "Go ahead, sweetie," she whispered, encouraging her to express herself, though she had no idea what her daughter might say. Emily's lips moved slightly, forming the beginnings of words, her finger never wavering from Rex. The courtroom seemed to collectively hold its breath. In that quiet, charged moment, time seemed to stretch. Officers glanced at one another, noticing the child's unwavering attention. The media adjusted cameras, capturing every angle, aware that something unique was unfolding. The judge, maintaining his formal demeanor, couldn't help but notice Emily's fascination. There was a purity in her gaze, a sincere admiration that reminded everyone present of the human capacity to recognize heroism without understanding all the complexities behind it. Emily's connection with Rex was palpable. She didn't yet know what tracking sense or evidence meant, but she understood loyalty, courage, and protection. The dog, in turn, remained calm, sensing the genuine admiration directed at him. It was a silent, mutual recognition, a bridge between human innocence and trained instinct, a bond that transcended words. In a room filled with adults focused on legalities, Emily had already grasped something profound, the essence of a hero. As the judge prepared to call the first witness, Emily's finger still hovered toward Rex. The room was tense, yet softened by the presence of the little girl and the dog. Every person present felt the subtle shift, the seriousness of the courtroom now mixed with a sense of warmth, anticipation, and curiosity. Something remarkable was about to happen, and though no one could have predicted exactly what, all eyes had been drawn to the quiet yet commanding connection between a 3-year-old child and a German shepherd who had already proven himself a hero. The first part of the trial had not even officially begun, and yet the story was already unfolding in a way that would be remembered for years. Emily's gaze never wavered. Rex remained composed, and in that charged, silent anticipation, the stage was perfectly set for a moment that no one expected, a moment of innocence, gratitude, and all that would soon touch everyone in the room, forever changing the ordinary proceedings of a small-town courtroom into something extraordinary. Rex had not always been the calm, commanding presence that now sat in the front of the courtroom. Years earlier, he had been a young, excitable German shepherd, full of energy and curiosity, barely able to focus on the simplest commands. Officer Daniels had spotted him at a local training facility, recognizing immediately that beneath Rex's boundless energy was the potential for something extraordinary. The dog had sharp intelligence, keen instincts, and a natural desire to protect. What he lacked in experience, he made up for with determination and loyalty. From the very first day, Daniels knew he had found more than a working dog. He had found a partner, a friend, and a hero in the making. The early months of training had been intense. Rex learned to respond to commands with near-perfect precision, to track scents across miles of unfamiliar terrain, and to maintain composure even in high-stress situations. He trained in rain, heat, and bitter cold, guided by Daniel's patient yet firm hand. They were partners in every sense. When Daniels gave a command, Rex obeyed, not out of fear but out of trust and respect. He learned to read subtle cues, to anticipate movements, and to act decisively when situations demanded. Rex wasn't just a police dog. He was a living symbol of courage, discipline, and loyalty. Emily, sitting on her mother's lap in the courtroom, was too young to understand the complexities of police work, of investigations, or the dangers involved in apprehending criminals. But she understood admiration, she understood awe, and she understood bravery. Her eyes never left Rex, studying every detail of him, the way his ears twitched, how his muscles remained poised even when the courtroom noise rose and fell, how his tail occasionally flicked with a rhythm that suggested calm alertness. She reached out her tiny hand, as if to touch the courage she could see radiating from him. Her mother whispered softly, "He's a good dog, Emily, a very brave dog." Emily simply nodded, her lips pressed together in concentration. She had seen dogs before at parks, in yards, and even on television, but none like this. Rex was different. There was an aura about him that seemed to say, "I know what's right. I know how to protect." It was a feeling Emily instinctively recognized, even without words to describe it. She tilted her head slightly, eyes widening with quiet admiration, completely absorbed by the four-legged hero before her. The courtroom settled into tense silence as the first officer took the stand. Detective Reynolds, a tall man with a calm voice, began to recount the events leading to the suspect's arrest. He spoke of surveillance, witness statements, and evidence collected. And then, with a slight smile, he said, "And then Rex did what no human could. He tracked the suspect across muddy fields, through dense brush, and onto a back alley where the suspect tried to hide. He never lost the scent. He never faltered." The room reacted. Journalists scribbled furiously, capturing every word. Emily's mother held her hand tighter, glancing down at her daughter, whose eyes had grown even wider. Emily leaned forward slightly, as if trying to understand exactly how the dog had done something so incredible. Her mind didn't yet grasp concepts like suspect or tracking, but she did understand the excitement, the bravery, and the importance of Rex's actions. Her fascination deepened, and with every word, she seemed to grow more connected to the dog, as if she already understood him in ways no one else could. Officer Daniels took a step forward to clarify Rex's role. "Rex has been trained for years," he explained. "Tracking suspects, finding evidence, and protecting the public are his specialties. Today, he's here to assist the court in understanding what happened that day. But he is more than a tool. He is a partner, a hero, and a friend." His voice carried a mix of pride and reverence, and it resonated across the room. Emily's tiny hand twitched again, pointing ever so slightly, her attention entirely fixed on Rex. She sensed what Daniels meant, even without fully understanding the words. The defendant shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at the dog with a mixture of apprehension and disbelief. He had been careful, thinking he could escape, but Rex had not wavered. The dog's presence alone was intimidating, a silent reminder of accountability. The judge watched intently, his expression calm but perceptive. He had seen many cases, many defendants, many K-9 units in his years on the bench, but he had never witnessed the quiet power of a child's fascination with a police dog. Emily's gaze had shifted the dynamic in the room, adding a subtle tension mixed with warmth that no one could ignore. Emily's concentration never broke. She was mesmerized by Rex's behavior, the way he remained perfectly still when commanded, how he observed every movement in the room with quiet attentiveness, and how he seemed almost aware of her gaze. Children have an uncanny ability to sense emotions and intentions without needing explanations, and Emily's connection with Rex was proof of that. She reached out once more, tiny fingers pointing steadily, and whispered something under her breath, inaudible to everyone else. Her mother glanced down at her, smiling softly, sensing that her daughter was about to do something remarkable. As the testimony continued, the officers recounted the sequence of events. Rex following faint scents through the night, his nose guiding him across uneven terrain, his body moving with precision and confidence. Witnesses described seeing a flash of fur emerging from dark alleys, and how Rex's trained instincts led to the quick apprehension of the suspect. Each detail painted a picture of courage and dedication, and Emily's eyes grew even brighter. She was fully engaged, her mind absorbing the narrative not as a story, but as a reality unfolding before her. The excitement, the bravery, and the heroism of Rex filled her young imagination. A few journalists noticed Emily pointing more persistently. Cameras adjusted subtly, capturing the interaction without interrupting the proceedings. The judge, aware of the quiet attention Emily drew, gave a gentle nod to the officers to continue. There was a collective acknowledgement in the room that what was about to happen, though unseen by most, would be unforgettable. Emily, small and seemingly insignificant in the grand scheme of the courtroom, had already become the center of attention, a quiet yet powerful witness to heroism in its purest form. Officer Daniels glanced down at Rex and gave him a subtle signal. The dog adjusted slightly, muscles flexing under his sleek coat, but remained calm and composed. Emily's tiny hand trembled ever so slightly as she pointed more deliberately. The room, filled with adults focused on procedures, began to feel the undercurrent of anticipation. Something extraordinary was about to unfold. Everyone in the courtroom, from the judge to the journalists to the spectators, felt it instinctively. The connection between a 3-year-old girl and a heroic dog had already begun to transcend words, hinting at a moment that no one could have predicted but everyone would remember. And so, with the courtroom proceedings underway, Emily sat, finger poised, eyes locked on Rex, fully immersed in the silent dialogue between innocence and bravery. The stage had been set. The tension in the room was no longer just about the trial. It was about a profound, unspoken connection forming, a moment of purity, admiration, and awe that would soon capture the hearts of everyone present. The smallest gestures often carry the greatest weight, and Emily was about to prove it. The courtroom had settled into a tense rhythm. Papers shuffled, chairs creaked under the weight of anticipation, and pens scratched quickly across notepads. Detective Reynolds, a tall man with an unwavering gaze and a calm voice, stepped up to the stand. His eyes swept across the room, taking in the judge, the jury, the journalists, and the townspeople who had come to witness justice unfold. Then, almost instinctively, his eyes paused on Rex, the German shepherd sitting silently beside Officer Daniels, ears alert and posture disciplined. Rex's presence was commanding without a sound, a quiet authority that seemed to hush the murmurs around him. Reynolds cleared his throat and began recounting the events of the night of the crime. On the evening of September 14th, he began, our department received a report of a break-in at 423 Maple Street. The suspect fled before officers could arrive, but Rex, our K-9 unit, was deployed immediately. His voice carried clearly through the courtroom, calm but purposeful. He described the suspect's escape route, the muddy trails, the darkness of the alleys, and the challenges officers faced while tracking the criminal. Every word painted a picture of tension, danger, and urgency. Emily's small fingers twitched with excitement as she leaned slightly closer to her mother. She didn't understand the technical details of reports or suspects, but she understood bravery. She understood that Rex was special. Her eyes followed every movement of the dog as he remained composed, muscles coiled like springs ready to act at any command. It was almost as if she could feel his focus, his discipline, and his courage radiating toward her. There was a magnetic pull, a silent conversation that only she seemed to understand. Reynolds continued, describing how Rex picked up the faint scent of the suspect, following it relentlessly through backyards, across muddy patches, and under fences that would have slowed most humans. Rex did not falter, Reynolds emphasized, his voice resonating with pride. Despite darkness, noise, and obstacles, he continued the pursuit. His training, his instincts, and his courage ensured that we were able to apprehend the suspect safely, without harm to the community or our officers. Each word seemed to lift the tension in the courtroom, replacing it with awe. Everyone was listening intently, but Emily's wide eyes reflected pure, unfiltered admiration. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably, rising from his seat to question the reliability of a canine witness. "Detective Reynolds," he began, voice firm but hesitant, "how can a dog, no matter how trained, provide evidence in this court? Surely human observations are more credible." There was a polite murmur in the courtroom as everyone processed the challenge. Officer Daniels remained calm, hand lightly resting on Rex's shoulder, ready to demonstrate the dog's discipline and reliability. Rex, for his part, remained perfectly still, ears flicking only slightly, eyes steady on the activity around him. Reynolds responded, his tone unwavering. "Rex is not merely a dog, he is a trained law enforcement officer. His sense of smell is thousands of times more precise than any human's. Every decision he makes in the field is a product of years of training, reinforced by obedience and trust in his handler. His actions are verifiable, observable, and repeatable. The evidence he helps uncover has consistently led to successful arrests, as it did in this case." As he spoke, Emily leaned a little further forward, her tiny hands gripping her mother's sleeve. She seemed to understand, in a way adults often overlook, the significance of Rex's bravery. The defense attorney frowned, clearly frustrated but aware that Rex had become the center of attention. The journalists, sensing something special, focused their cameras not only on the testimony but also on Emily. The 3-year-old's gaze was unwavering, her expression a mix of concentration, curiosity, and admiration. Her tiny hand twitched again, pointing subtly toward Rex, as if to acknowledge, yes, this dog is remarkable. The judge allowed the testimony to continue, recognizing the undeniable impact the dog had on the case. Reynolds recounted the exact moment Rex caught up to the suspect. "The suspect tried to hide behind a dumpster," he said, voice steady. "Rex approached silently, assessed the situation, and held his position until officers arrived. There was no aggression beyond what was necessary, no harm beyond what was required. His discipline ensured the suspect was apprehended safely." Emily's eyes widened further. She leaned closer to her mother, whispering something inaudible. Sarah smiled, brushing Emily's hair from her face, sensing the little girl was deeply affected by what she was witnessing. The courtroom seemed to shift around them. The tension of the trial remained, but the focus had subtly moved. This was no longer just about burglary, about evidence, or about law and procedure. It was about courage, discipline, and the bond between humans and animals. The jurors leaned in slightly, journalists adjusted their cameras, and even the defendant's gaze shifted toward Rex. There was something magnetic about the dog, something that went beyond obedience, training, and law enforcement. It was the quiet presence of heroism that resonated even in a room filled with adults. Emily's fascination grew with each passing second. She studied Rex's posture, noting how his muscles moved beneath his sleek coat, how his eyes scanned the room, and how he remained calm despite the noise, the cameras, and the people all around him. She reached out slightly, tiny fingers pointing more deliberately, as if to communicate her admiration directly to the dog. To Emily, Rex was more than a K-9 unit. He was a guardian, a hero, and a friend. The room seemed to collectively sense this connection, subtle but undeniable, between child and dog. Reynolds continued with the final details, emphasizing how Rex had remained obedient and focused throughout the pursuit. "Every step Rex took," he said, "was guided by training, reinforced by trust, and executed with precision. Without Rex, we might not have captured the suspect. His courage and discipline saved time, resources, and potentially lives." The words carried weight, and Emily's small hand quivered with excitement. She understood bravery. She understood loyalty. She understood that Rex had done something extraordinary. The judge nodded appreciatively, allowing the testimony to conclude, acknowledging Rex's role in the successful apprehension. The courtroom, previously tense with the expectation of legal argument, now seemed filled with awe. Whispers spread across the benches, journalists adjusted microphones, and officers exchanged quiet smiles. Emily's gaze never wavered, and her tiny hand stayed pointed subtly toward Rex, a gesture both innocent and profoundly meaningful. It was a silent acknowledgement of heroism, courage, and the connection between a child and a remarkable dog. Even the defense attorney, though focused on procedural strategy, couldn't ignore the impact. The courtroom had shifted subtly, from a space of tension and anticipation to a place where courage, loyalty, and admiration were palpable. Emily's quiet presence, her fascination with Rex, had added a human dimension to the legal proceedings, a reminder that sometimes innocence and heroism speak louder than words. The jurors, too, seemed affected by the subtle energy, leaning in slightly, their attention caught not only by the testimony but by the dynamic unfolding between child and dog. By the end of the testimony, everyone present sensed that something extraordinary was building. Emily's fascination had not waned. If anything, it had grown stronger. She leaned closer to her mother, whispering again in the faintest of voices, while her finger remained pointed toward Rex. The room held its collective breath, unaware of what was about to happen but sensing that it would be unforgettable. In a courtroom filled with legal arguments and procedural details, a 3-year-old child and a heroic dog had already created a moment of silent connection that transcended words. And so, as the judge prepared to call the next witness, the tension in the courtroom remained high, but it was tempered by a quiet warmth, a subtle anticipation of something remarkable. Emily's gaze, unbroken and full of awe, remained fixed on Rex. The dog, calm and composed, acknowledged her silent attention with a slight tilt of his head. The stage was set for a moment no one could have predicted, a moment of innocence, admiration, and heartfelt gratitude that would leave an impression on everyone present, forever changing the ordinary rhythm of a small-town courtroom into something extraordinary. The courtroom had shifted subtly since the beginning of the day. Where once the air had been filled with murmurs and the occasional shuffle of papers, now a quiet tension lingered, punctuated only by the soft hum of air conditioning and the occasional creak of a chair. The audience had grown used to the rhythm of proceedings, the formal cadence of testimony, the deliberate words of officers and lawyers. But amidst it all, one small observer had captured the attention of nearly everyone in the room: 3-year-old Emily, her tiny body perched on her mother's lap, eyes fixed unwaveringly on Rex. Rex, the German Shepherd police dog, sat alert beside Officer Daniels, muscles coiled, ears perked, and eyes scanning the room with sharp intelligence. He was calm, disciplined, and fully aware of the proceedings around him, yet there was a softness to his gaze as it flicked toward Emily. Perhaps it was instinct, or perhaps a bond that only animals seem capable of sensing, but the dog seemed attuned to the little girl who had spent the past hour observing him with fascination. Emily, for her part, did not break her stare. Her small hand twitched slightly, then slowly rose, a single finger pointing in Rex's direction. At first, the gesture went unnoticed by most. Journalists were adjusting microphones and cameras, officers whispered quietly among themselves, and the judge prepared to call the next witness. But Emily's gesture was deliberate, intentional, and unwavering. Her tiny finger, trembling ever so slightly, stayed aimed at Rex, who did not flinch. The calm authority of the dog seemed to absorb the innocent gesture, responding with quiet acknowledgement, a slight tilt of the head and the slow wag of a tail. Then a whisper began to ripple through the courtroom. "Is she pointing at the dog?" a juror murmured. Another nodded subtly, leaning toward their neighbor. "I think she is." The whisper spread slowly, like a wave moving across the benches. People craned their necks, trying to see what had captured the child's attention. Officer Daniels noticed first, smiling quietly, and gave Rex a subtle nod of approval. The dog, trained to react to commands alone, did not move, yet his posture seemed to soften, as if recognizing the tiny hand pointing in his direction. Emily leaned slightly forward, her concentration absolute. She didn't speak, but her lips moved subtly, forming words no one could hear. Her mother, sensing the moment, whispered softly, "Go ahead, sweetie. If you want to talk to him, you can." Emily only nodded, eyes wide with anticipation. There was a moment of perfect silence, broken only by the faint rustle of papers and the soft ticking of a wall clock. Every eye in the courtroom gradually shifted toward the child, realizing that something unusual was unfolding. Journalists quickly adjusted cameras, capturing the interaction. "Get a shot of the girl," one whispered. "She's pointing at the dog. This could be the story of the year." Reporters scribbled notes furiously, and some began whispering to each other, speculating on what a 3-year-old could possibly say to a trained police dog in the middle of a courtroom. The atmosphere shifted from procedural seriousness to a mixture of curiosity, anticipation, and a surprising warmth. Even the defendant, previously tense and defensive, glanced at Emily with a raised eyebrow. For a moment, the rigid tension in his shoulders softened, though his expression remained guarded. There was something magnetic about the silent connection forming between Emily and Rex, a connection that transcended the usual dynamics of courtroom proceedings. The judge, maintaining his composure, allowed the moment to unfold, sensing that this brief interruption was both harmless and profoundly meaningful. Emily's finger twitched slightly, her gaze locked on Rex's eyes. It was as if she were communicating silently, sending a small, childlike message that carried weight far beyond her years. The dog, fully aware and disciplined, remained still, but the tilt of his head and the subtle wag of his tail seemed to acknowledge the gesture. Emily's mother whispered again, a soft, encouraging murmur. "Say something if you want, sweetheart." Emily hesitated for a fraction of a second, then leaned just a little closer, her lips forming 2 words in a voice so soft they were almost imperceptible. The courtroom seemed to collectively lean in. Every officer, juror, journalist, and resident suddenly became aware of the small child pointing at the dog. There was a quiet, electric anticipation. Emily's gesture had transformed from a simple act of curiosity into something profound, a silent acknowledgement of heroism, courage, and a bond that only innocence can perceive. The room felt suspended in time, waiting for the revelation that would soon come. Reynolds, who had finished his testimony, paused mid-note, noticing the unusual energy in the room. His eyes swept across the benches, and for the first time he saw Emily pointing directly at Rex, her tiny form radiating focus and concentration. "Well," he muttered quietly to Officer Daniels, "that little one has some courage. She's not afraid of him." Daniels smiled, adjusting Rex's harness slightly. The dog shifted subtly, tail flicking ever so gently, as if understanding the child's silent communication. Emily's gesture was no longer just a movement of her tiny hand. It had become the center of the courtroom's attention. Whispers of astonishment passed through the audience. "Look at her," one juror said softly. "She's completely mesmerized." Cameras clicked, capturing the tableau. A small child, a heroic dog, and a room full of people holding their collective breath. The balance of power in the courtroom had subtly shifted. For a moment, legal proceedings were secondary to the silent drama unfolding before them. Her mother encouraged her softly. "Do you want to tell him something, Emily?" Emily nodded slightly, lips moving slowly as she formed words that would soon leave an indelible mark on everyone present. The anticipation was palpable. Journalists whispered to each other, sensing that the moment would be extraordinary. Officers glanced at one another, some blinking back tears, aware that they were witnessing something rare, a child's recognition of bravery in a dog trained to serve and protect. Emily's finger stayed pointed steadily, unwavering. Her eyes glistened slightly, reflecting the courtroom lights and the awe she felt. She leaned closer, almost as if bridging the small distance between herself and the dog. Rex, calm and disciplined, did not move. Yet his steady gaze met hers, and the subtle wag of his tail communicated acknowledgement, understanding, and a quiet, almost imperceptible connection. In that moment, the courtroom, filled with adults focused on legalities, watched a silent conversation unfold. carried on gestures and recognition rather than words. The judge, recognizing the significance of the moment, leaned slightly forward. He gave a faint nod to the attorneys and officers, allowing Emily to express herself freely. The atmosphere in the room had softened. Tension remained, but it was tempered by a warmth and curiosity that hung palpably in the air. Emily's gesture, small yet deliberate, had become an act of courage and recognition. It was impossible to ignore. Emily's lips finally moved audibly, forming two simple words that would resonate through the courtroom and beyond. The moment was quiet, intimate, and charged with anticipation. Cameras focused, officers leaned in, jurors held their breath, and the defendant, despite himself, looked at the child and the dog with a mixture of surprise and awe. Every eye in the room was now on Emily, the tiny girl who had been silent for so long, her gesture and gaze commanding more attention than the testimony itself. Her words, soft but clear, carried across the courtroom, breaking the silence in the most profound way. Two words that embodied gratitude, recognition, and the pure innocence of a child. Two words that would become the defining moment of the trial, capturing hearts, inspiring awe, and demonstrating the power of a simple, sincere gesture. And in that moment, the courtroom, previously filled with tension, murmurs, and anticipation, transformed. The focus shifted from legal proceedings to the extraordinary, from the procedural to the profoundly human, from facts and evidence to emotion, courage, and the recognition of heroism in its purest form. Emily's gesture, once tiny and easily overlooked, had become the heartbeat of the room, setting the stage for a moment that no one expected but everyone would remember forever. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. All the shuffling papers, low murmurs, and clicking cameras faded into silence as the tiny figure of Emily leaned just a little closer toward Rex. Her small, delicate hand was still pointing firmly at the German shepherd, whose eyes met hers with a calm intelligence that seemed almost human. In that moment, time itself appeared to slow, the outside world melting away as every adult in the room became acutely aware of the quiet anticipation. Emily's lips parted, forming words that were soft, yet carried a weight far beyond her 3 years. "Thank you," she whispered. The effect was instantaneous. A hush fell over the room as if everyone had collectively realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Two words spoken by the smallest person in the room held a power that no testimony, no evidence, and no legal argument could match. "Thank you," simple, innocent, profound. The judge paused mid-note, blinking behind his glasses. His stern, professional demeanor softened, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It wasn't often that a courtroom, a space built for law, evidence, and procedure, experienced a moment so human. Yet here it was, undeniable and pure, carried across the room on the voice of a 3-year-old girl. Officer Daniels, standing tall beside Rex, felt his chest tighten. He had worked with many K-9 units over the years, seen heroic moments, and known the impact a well-trained dog could have on a case. But the raw emotional resonance of a child expressing gratitude to a dog who had risked so much, so quietly, yet so profoundly, was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Rex, calm and poised as always, tilted his head slightly, tail wagging gently, as if acknowledging the words, as if understanding their significance. Emily's mother, Sarah, felt tears prick her eyes. She gently squeezed her daughter's shoulder, whispering softly, "Yes, sweetheart, that's right. That's a good dog, isn't it?" Emily nodded, her gaze unwavering. In her mind, the two words carried everything she felt: admiration, awe, and gratitude. She didn't understand the details of what Rex had done to apprehend the suspect or how his training worked. What she understood was simpler, yet infinitely more profound. Bravery deserved recognition, and Rex had earned hers. Courtroom, silent for a moment, began to react. Some of the jurors exchanged glances, their eyes wide, some blinking back tears. One elderly man shifted in his seat, whispering under his breath to the neighbor, "Did you hear that?" 2 words and the whole meaning of this case changes. Even the defendant, previously tense and defensive, looked momentarily disarmed. He had never expected the courtroom, so focused on legal proceedings, to be interrupted by such a pure and innocent acknowledgement. Journalists captured every moment. Cameras clicked and whirred, some zooming in on Emily's small face, her earnest eyes shining, while others focused on Rex, whose composed posture and subtle acknowledgement of the gesture created a perfect, almost cinematic tableau. Reporters whispered excitedly to one another, already sensing that this moment would go far beyond the local news cycle. "Get this angle, child, dog, courtroom. This is the story everyone will remember," one said, adjusting his lens. The officers present were visibly moved. Sergeant Mitchell, a veteran of 20 years, leaned slightly toward Daniels, muttering under his breath, "I've seen dogs do amazing things, but I've never seen gratitude like this. From a kid, it's incredible." The words were true. They had trained dogs, handled crime scenes, apprehended suspects, and worked long nights. Yet no amount of professionalism could have prepared them for the emotional impact of seeing a child recognize bravery with two simple words. Even the judge, seasoned in the mechanics of law, allowed a subtle human reaction to break through. He nodded slowly, a warm smile touching his features. "Well," he said softly, though his voice carried throughout the courtroom, "it seems we have a very brave and grateful young witness today." His words, though understated, captured the essence of the moment. That innocence and courage often speak louder than legal testimony. Emily's gesture, her pointing hand, her wide eyes, and now her words, had created a ripple effect. Adults who had come expecting a standard courtroom procedure were now emotionally invested in something more profound. They were witnessing gratitude expressed in its purest form, unfiltered by age or understanding, directed toward a hero who had already proven himself beyond measure. There was a shared acknowledgement in the room. Some moments, no matter how small or fleeting, are unforgettable. Rex, trained to follow commands and maintain composure, seemed almost aware of the attention. His ears twitched slightly, his head tilted, and his tail wagged subtly as if confirming Emily's words. "Yes, I understand. Thank you back." The silent communication between dog and child was palpable. Everyone in the courtroom felt it. The heroism of the dog, the innocence of the child, and the undeniable bond forming between them. Emily's mother whispered again, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "You did it, sweetie. You told him how brave he is." Emily's face broke into the tiniest smile, a mixture of pride and satisfaction. She didn't understand that her words would be shared far beyond the courtroom, printed in newspapers and broadcast on local news. To her, it was a simple expression of admiration, heartfelt and true. Yet in that simplicity lay the power to move every adult in the room. Some of the courtroom spectators shifted in their seats, dabbing at their eyes. Whispers spread, a collective acknowledgement of the impact of two words. "Did you hear that?" one murmured. "A kid and she's thanking a dog. Incredible." The energy in the room had changed. What had begun as a tense legal proceeding had evolved into a moment of shared humanity, one that reminded everyone present of courage, gratitude, and the extraordinary bond between humans and animals. Even the defendant seemed touched, if only fleetingly. His posture softened slightly, shoulders less rigid. He glanced at Rex and then at Emily, perhaps realizing that this case, which had been about evidence and guilt, had also become about something more, something beyond legal judgment. It was about heroism recognized, bravery honored, and innocence celebrated. The courtroom's atmosphere, once charged with tension, had shifted to one of quiet awe and admiration. Detective Reynolds, still at the stand, allowed a faint smile to appear. He was used to recounting stories of Rex's heroics, but he had never seen one resonate in this way. The child's words, the gesture, and the silent acknowledgement of the dog created a moment that transcended testimony. "Sometimes," Reynolds whispered to Daniels quietly, "it's not the facts or evidence that touch people the most, it's moments like this, pure, simple, and real." Daniels nodded, eyes glistening. Emily's two words echoed softly in the room, carried on a quiet breeze of innocence, admiration, and gratitude. "Thank you." They were so small, yet they held immense weight. They reminded every adult present why they did what they did, why officers trained dogs like Rex, why they dedicated themselves to service, and why moments of recognition, however small, are profoundly human. Every person in the room felt it. An unspoken acknowledgement that bravery deserved recognition, and recognition could change hearts, even in the most formal, rigid spaces. Rex, still alert but calm, leaned slightly forward, tail flicking gently. His gaze remained fixed on Emily, the child who had spoken words he could not understand but somehow recognize. The dog had spent years learning commands, tracking scents and apprehending criminals. Yet this simple gesture of gratitude from a small human, was perhaps the purest acknowledgement he could ever receive. And in that acknowledgement, the room collectively felt the power of innocence and heroism intersecting. The judge allowed a soft smile to linger on his face. "Well, I think we've all witnessed something remarkable today," he said, voice calm but warm. "A young witness, a heroic dog, and the simplest of words that carry the greatest meaning." His words were understated, but they confirmed what everyone already knew. This moment would be remembered long after the trial concluded. Emily, eyes still locked on Rex, felt the warmth of the room, the acknowledgement of her words, and the silent understanding of the dog before her. She had expressed gratitude in the purest way she knew how, and it had been heard. The weight of the courtroom, the tension, and the seriousness of the case had momentarily given way to a moment of shared humanity, a moment in which innocence and heroism spoke louder than law and procedure. And so, with two small words, "Thank you," Emily had created a memory that would linger in the hearts of everyone present. The courtroom had witnessed not just a trial but a profound connection, a reminder of courage, loyalty, and the power of gratitude expressed in its most innocent and sincere form. The courtroom atmosphere had transformed completely. Where there had once been only the rigid order of legal procedure, now a sense of warmth, awe, and quiet amazement permeated the room. Emily's two words, "Thank you," had created a moment so profound that it seemed to linger in the air, refusing to dissipate. Even as the trial continued, the ripple effects of that tiny act of gratitude were evident in every corner of the room. Journalists whispered excitedly to each other, some adjusting cameras to capture the lingering expressions of awe on the faces of officers, jurors, and spectators. "This is gold," one reporter murmured under his breath, adjusting his lens to focus on Emily and Rex. "The story isn't just about the case anymore. It's about courage, gratitude, and a child who saw it all." Others nodded, scribbling notes furiously, trying to describe the rare magic of a courtroom moment that transcended facts and evidence. Emily's mother, Sarah, felt her heart swell as she looked down at her daughter. "You did something really special, sweetie," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face. Emily's wide brown eyes blinked up at her, filled with a mixture of pride and innocence. She didn't understand that her two words would become a viral story, featured in local news and shared across social media platforms. To her, it was simple, heartfelt communication, gratitude expressed in the purest form. Even the officers present felt the emotional weight of the moment. Officer Daniels gently patted Rex's side, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond between the dog and the child. "You hear that, buddy?" he murmured softly, almost to himself. "She understands. She sees what we've always known. You're more than just a police dog." Rex, calm and disciplined, simply wagged his tail, acknowledging the tiny human whose appreciation had spoken louder than any words the adults had said. The jurors, too, were visibly affected. Many had spent years analyzing evidence, listening to testimony and weighing the facts in a sterile, professional manner. Yet Emily's gesture reminded them of something they often overlooked. Courage and heroism exist outside of courtrooms and statutes, and sometimes they are recognized in the smallest, simplest forms. A grandmother on the jury dabbed at her eyes discreetly, whispering to the juror next to her, "I've seen bravery, but not like this. Not so pure." Even the defendant, tense and defensive just moments ago, seemed to shift in his seat. While the gravity of the trial and the weight of evidence remained undeniable, the sight of a child expressing such sincere gratitude to a dog who had apprehended him stirred something unexpected. He glanced at Emily and Rex, briefly softening his gaze before returning to his lawyer. Though his reaction was fleeting, It added to the undeniable sense that this courtroom was witnessing more than just legal proceedings. It was witnessing humanity in its most heartfelt form. The judge, a veteran of countless trials, allowed a faint smile to linger. He had seen many extraordinary cases, dramatic testimonies, and moments of tension, but Emily's simple act of gratitude had shifted the energy of the room. "Let's proceed," he said, his voice steady but warmer than before. "But I think we all need to acknowledge the courage in this room, both human and canine." The remark, understated as it was, elicited subtle nods and quiet smiles throughout the courtroom. Outside the courtroom, the ripple effect of the moment began almost immediately. Journalists who had been covering the trial sent notes to editors, photographs circulated, and social media buzzed with a photo of Emily pointing at Rex, her tiny hand and earnest eyes capturing hearts. Headlines ranged from heartfelt to awe-inspiring. 3-year-old thanks hero dog in courtroom. Moment everyone will remember. And innocence meets heroism. The child who recognized bravery. The story spread quickly, resonating far beyond the local community. Meanwhile, Emily remained perched on her mother's lap, seemingly oblivious to the attention she had generated. To her, the courtroom was still full of adults talking. Rex was still the hero she admired, and the act of saying thank you had been enough. She leaned slightly closer to her mother, whispering again, "Good dog," as if reinforcing the connection she had established with Rex. Sarah smiled softly, squeezing her daughter's shoulder, marveling at the depth of Emily's understanding despite her young age. Inside the courtroom, the energy shifted back to proceedings, but the warmth lingered. Officers continued their testimony, jurors remained attentive, and lawyers proceeded with cross-examinations, yet the memory of the two words and the innocence behind them was embedded in every witness statement, every whispered observation. Emily's act had reminded everyone present of the human dimension of justice. Courage deserves recognition, and gratitude, even from the smallest voice, carries immeasurable power. Rex's role in the case remained central, but the focus had subtly shifted. Where before he had been a tool of law enforcement, now he was a hero in the truest sense, recognized not only by humans trained to handle him, but also by the pure, unfiltered acknowledgement of a child. Every subtle movement, a wag of the tail, a tilt of the head, seemed amplified by Emily's gaze, reinforcing the quiet connection that had grown between them. Emily's small voice continued to echo in the minds of those present, a gentle reminder that heroism isn't always acknowledged in grand speeches or formal awards. Sometimes, it is recognized in the simplest acts of gratitude. The courtroom, initially tense and procedural, had become a place of shared emotion, a collective experience of awe and admiration. The adults around her realized that a child's understanding, though limited in context, could often perceive the essence of bravery more clearly than their seasoned eyes. The media coverage that followed cemented the moment into local history. Interviews with Officer Daniels highlighted Rex's training, dedication, and courage, while Emily's words were replayed and celebrated as a symbol of innocence recognizing heroism. Community members shared the story widely, expressing admiration not only for Rex, but also for the insight and sincerity of a 3-year-old who saw what others often overlook. Back in the courtroom, the trial continued, but the energy had shifted permanently. The gravity of the case remained, but the emotional landscape had changed. Emily's simple acknowledgement had reminded everyone that amidst facts, evidence, and procedure, there exists an underlying humanity that cannot be ignored. It was a reminder that courage, loyalty, and gratitude are universally recognized, even by the smallest among us. As proceedings moved forward, Emily's presence became quietly influential. Jurors, officers, and spectators found themselves reflecting on the significance of heroism beyond the facts of the case. Rex, ever calm and disciplined, continued to act as the embodiment of bravery, his connection to Emily serving as a living testament to the power of trust, recognition, and silent acknowledgement. The courtroom moment, small yet monumental, had transformed not only the trial itself, but also the hearts of those who witnessed it. 2 words, "Thank you," spoken by a tiny child, had reminded everyone present that heroism is seen, appreciated, and honored in ways that transcend logic, law, or adult understanding. And as Emily rested back against her mother's shoulder, her hand still brushing the dog lightly, the room collectively understood that they had experienced something extraordinary, something that would be remembered long after the trial concluded. The courtroom had returned to its usual rhythm, but the energy that Emily had sparked was impossible to ignore. Where once there had been only procedural tension, now a quiet warmth lingered, like sunlight slipping through a closed window. Jurors whispered softly among themselves, journalists scribbled fervently, and officers exchanged quiet smiles. Emily, perched on her mother's lap, was still focused on Rex, the German shepherd who had become far more than a K-9 unit in her eyes. He was a hero, a protector, and a friend. The trial moved toward its conclusion. The prosecution presented its final evidence, a combination of physical evidence and Rex's testimony in the form of behavior observations and trained responses. Every step reinforced what had already been established. Rex's heroism, discipline, and accuracy in apprehending the suspect were undeniable. Yet in the hearts of everyone present, Emily's tiny words, "Thank you," lingered far longer than any legal argument. Detective Reynolds rose to deliver his closing statement. He spoke with a calm authority, recounting the sequence of events, the suspect's escape, and Rex's discipline tracking through darkness, mud, and obstacles. Yet even as he spoke, his mind occasionally flicked to Emily's words, quietly echoing in his thoughts, 2 words but 1,000 meanings. It was a reminder that courage often transcends reports, statistics, and procedures. Sometimes it is recognized in the purest, simplest form, through the eyes and voice of a child. The defense attorney attempted to argue for leniency, highlighting procedural details and questioning elements of the case. But even he, seasoned in courtroom battles, could not ignore the emotional undercurrent Emily had created. The jurors, previously focused solely on legal details, now viewed Rex as more than a tool. They had witnessed bravery, discipline, and a bond recognized by someone whose innocence could see truths adults sometimes overlooked. Emily's simple act had humanized the trial in a way no legal argument could counter. Emily remained engaged throughout, her tiny hands clasped lightly in her lap when not pointing toward Rex. Occasionally, she whispered quietly to her mother, "Good dog," as if reinforcing the connection she had established earlier. Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "You've done something very special, Emily," she whispered, voice barely audible. The little girl nodded solemnly, her eyes never leaving the dog who had captured her admiration from the moment she first entered the courtroom. The jury deliberated in relative silence, each member contemplating not only the evidence presented but also the intangible impact of Emily's gesture. They had seen bravery acknowledged, heroism recognized, and innocence express gratitude in a way that transcended law and procedure. When they returned to deliver the verdict, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric with anticipation. Every eye, whether it belonged to a spectator, officer, or journalist, focused on the small child whose 2 words had forever altered the tone of the day. "Members of the jury," the judge began, "have you reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," a juror replied, voice steady but soft. "We have." The courtroom held its collective breath. Emily's mother instinctively held her daughter a little closer, as if anticipating the final crescendo of the trial. The defendant's posture remained tense, though there was a subtle shift in his gaze toward Rex, as if acknowledging that the dog had been more than a participant in the events. He had been a silent arbiter of justice. The foreperson read the verdict aloud. "We find the defendant guilty as charged." A wave of relief swept through the courtroom. Officers exchanged quiet nods, some clapping softly. Journalists jotted notes and adjusted cameras to capture reactions. Emily, small and solemn, blinked at Rex, who remained calm and dignified, tail flicking ever so slightly. She whispered once more, "Good dog," and reached out a tiny hand to touch his paw lightly. The gesture was simple, Yet in its simplicity lay profound meaning: gratitude, recognition, and the unspoken bond between a child and a hero. The judge allowed a soft smile to linger. "It seems," he said, voice warm, "that this courtroom has witnessed not only justice but also the human capacity to recognize courage in all its forms. Today, we have seen it in the actions of a trained police dog and in the eyes of a small child." His words were understated, yet they carried the weight of acknowledgement that would resonate with everyone present long after the trial ended. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, eager to capture the story that had already begun spreading through social media. Cameras focused on Emily and Rex, the tiny girl pointing at the dog who had captivated a courtroom. Interviews with Officer Daniels highlighted Rex's training and dedication, but the reporters were more fascinated by the dynamic between the child and the dog. Emily's two words, "thank," replayed, shared, and celebrated as a symbol of innocence recognizing bravery. Community members, many of whom had attended the trial, shared the story widely. Local schools invited Emily and Rex to speak about courage, responsibility, and the unique bond between humans and animals. Civic organizations praised the example of gratitude, heroism, and compassion demonstrated in the courtroom. Emily, unaware of the media frenzy, simply continued to admire Rex, her tiny voice occasionally whispering words of praise and affection. Even the defendant, now facing the reality of the verdict, seemed momentarily impacted by the story. Though accountability remained essential, he glanced at Emily and Rex with a quiet acknowledgement that the courtroom had witnessed something beyond law and consequence, a reminder that acts of courage deserve recognition, and that gratitude, no matter how small, carries a transformative power. Officer Daniels reflected privately on the day's events. He had trained many K-9 units, seen countless heroic moments, and handled dozens of cases, but Emily's acknowledgement had created something uniquely profound. "It's rare," he whispered to a fellow officer, "to see bravery recognized in such a pure, simple way. 2 words and the room changes forever. That's something neither Rex nor I will ever forget." Rex leaned gently into Daniels, tail wagging softly, as if in agreement. Emily's mother, watching her daughter and the dog, felt a swell of pride and awe. Her 3-year-old had expressed something adults often struggle to articulate: gratitude, admiration, and the recognition of heroism. "You've done something remarkable, Emily," she said softly. The little girl looked up, blinking in innocence, unaware of the lasting impact her words had already created. "I just said thank you," Emily replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Over the next few days, the story of Emily and Rex captured hearts across the community and beyond. Local news stations aired footage of the courtroom moment, highlighting the bond between the child and the police dog. Social media shared photos and videos, celebrating the 2 words that had conveyed so much: gratitude, recognition, and the timeless power of innocence acknowledging courage. Schools, civic groups, and animal organizations praised the story, reinforcing the lesson that heroism is often best recognized by those who see it with unfiltered eyes. Back in the police department, Rex received quiet commendations from his colleagues, but it was Emily's acknowledgement that mattered most. Officer Daniels allowed her to meet Rex in private after the trial, letting her pat him gently and whisper her thanks once more. The dog, ever disciplined, remained calm, but the subtle wag of his tail and the tilt of his head communicated understanding and connection. For Emily, it was a perfect conclusion, a small, heartfelt acknowledgement that reinforced her admiration and formed a bond that would endure for years to come. The courtroom moment, once fleeting, had transformed into a story of courage, gratitude, and human-animal connection that would be remembered long after the legal proceedings ended. Emily's 2 words had created a ripple effect, touching everyone present, inspiring a community, and reminding all who witnessed it that heroism and appreciation often transcend age, circumstance, and expectation. Weeks had passed since the courtroom scene that captured the hearts of everyone present. Yet for Emily, her mother Sarah, and Officer Daniels, the memory of that day remained vivid, etched in their minds like a photograph that could never fade. Rex, the German shepherd, continued his duties at the police department, but something had subtly changed. He was no longer just a K-9 officer. He was a symbol of courage, loyalty, and the quiet heroism that had been recognized by a tiny, wide-eyed girl. The local community embraced the story with warmth and admiration. Newspapers carried front-page headlines about Emily's courtroom gesture. Videos circulated online capturing her pointing at Rex and whispering her 2 words of gratitude. And local news stations interviewed officers and jurors about the unforgettable moment. Everyone seemed to agree. A 3-year-old had reminded an entire town of something adults often overlooked, that heroism deserves recognition and gratitude has power beyond measure. Emily's days were filled with the usual routines of a preschooler: coloring, playing with blocks, and chasing butterflies in the backyard. Yet she carried with her a newfound confidence, a quiet awareness that her words could have impact. She would often talk about Rex, mimicking his disciplined movements, or whisper to her toys as if explaining the importance of courage and bravery. Her mother noticed this, smiling softly, realizing that Emily's innocence had allowed her to see what many adults couldn't: the true value of heroism and gratitude. At the police department, Officer Daniels continued to train and work with Rex, but he noticed the subtle change in the dog as well. Rex seemed to carry himself with a quiet pride, as if he understood that his actions had been recognized not only by humans trained to assess evidence, but also by the pure, unfiltered acknowledgement of a child. Whenever Emily visited, Rex remained calm yet attentive, allowing her to pat him, whisper words of praise, or simply sit quietly beside him. Their connection had grown into something extraordinary, a silent friendship that transcended the boundaries of age and species. The story had also inspired other children in the community. Local schools invited Emily and Rex to participate in educational programs about courage, loyalty, and respect for animals. Emily, shy but confident, would walk slowly into classrooms, her tiny hand pointing to Rex as she whispered, "Good dog," just as she had done in the courtroom. Teachers marveled at the impact, noting that children seemed more attentive, more aware of bravery and responsibility, and more eager to express gratitude. Emily's simple gesture had sparked a ripple effect that extended far beyond the courtroom walls. Even the officers and jurors who had witnessed the trial spoke of the enduring impact of Emily's words. Sergeant Mitchell, a seasoned officer, remarked during a community event, "I've seen dogs do incredible things, but it's rare to see gratitude acknowledged so purely. That little girl reminded us all why we do what we do. Courage deserves recognition, and Emily gave it." Reynolds nodded beside him, adding, "It's amazing how innocence can illuminate truths adults often overlook." Those 2 words, "thank you," echoed louder than any report or testimony ever could. Emily's mother often reflected on how a single, small moment could change so many lives. She had entered the courtroom that day expecting a typical legal proceeding, yet left with a memory of her daughter's innocence creating a profound impact on a room full of adults. She realized that heroism was not only about actions, but also about acknowledgement. Emily had seen and recognized bravery in its purest form, and in doing so, reminded everyone present of the human capacity to appreciate, honor, and respond with compassion. The media continued to highlight the story over the following months. Social media posts featured clips of Emily pointing at Rex, spreading across platforms with hashtags celebrating courage, loyalty, and gratitude. Local news stations ran segments on the bond between Emily and Rex, while national programs invited Officer Daniels to discuss the importance of K-9 units in law enforcement. Yet through all the attention and accolades, Emily remained unassuming, her gestures simple and sincere, her focus always on Rex rather than the attention she received. Community members who had attended the trial frequently shared the story, describing the moment with awe and emotion. It wasn't just a courtroom event, one resident explained during a local panel discussion. It was a lesson in humanity, That little girl reminded us that bravery isn't only measured by what someone does. It's also recognized by those who see it clearly, no matter their age. Emily's words brought a human perspective to heroism that touched us all. As time passed, Emily's bond with Rex became a symbol for the town. Children visited the police station to meet the heroic dog, learning about discipline, training, and loyalty. Emily, always at Rex's side, would demonstrate her gesture, pointing and whispering her words of gratitude. Parents and teachers marveled at her insight, understanding that she had, in her own way, taught a community about the importance of acknowledging courage. Even within her family, Emily's 2 words had lasting significance. Sarah often found her daughter pausing during daily activities, looking at Rex or other animals with careful observation, whispering soft words of appreciation. It was a small, beautiful reminder that gratitude was not limited to people or events. It could be expressed for acts of bravery, kindness, and loyalty in any form. Emily had internalized a lesson most adults only learn after years of reflection. Recognizing courage is as important as performing it. At the police station, Rex continued his duties with unwavering discipline. Yet there was an unmistakable change in the atmosphere whenever Emily visited. His demeanor softened, his focus sharpened in response to her presence, and his interactions with her reflected a deep, silent acknowledgement of the connection they shared. Officer Daniels often observed the pair, thinking quietly, "It's rare to see this level of understanding between child and K9." Emily's words gave Rex something beyond training. They gave him recognition, a gift he didn't even know he needed. Emily's story became a lesson for the community, law enforcement, and beyond. Civic organizations praised the courtroom moment as an example of the human-animal bond, and educational programs highlighted the power of gratitude in recognizing bravery. The lesson was clear. Courage deserves acknowledgement, and sometimes it takes the perspective of someone small, innocent, and unfiltered to remind adults of truths they may overlook. Years later, the story of Emily and Rex continued to inspire. Local newspapers featured anniversary pieces, recounting the moment a 3-year-old pointed at a police dog and said 2 words that echoed across a courtroom, a town, and eventually a nation. The impact endured, not because of legal rulings or police reports, but because of a child's sincere acknowledgement of bravery. Emily grew older, carrying with her the lesson that small acts of gratitude could ripple outward, touching lives in ways beyond imagination. And through it all, Rex remained by Officer Daniels' side, calm, disciplined, and always ready for the next call. Yet whenever Emily visited, a subtle change occurred, a tilt of the head, a gentle wag of the tail, a soft gaze that communicated understanding. The bond forged in that courtroom moment became timeless, a quiet testament to heroism recognized, bravery honored, and the extraordinary power of innocence to touch hearts. In the end, the story of Emily and Rex was not just about a courtroom, a trial, or even a heroic dog. It was about connection, recognition, and the ways in which courage can be seen, acknowledged, and appreciated by the purest of hearts. It reminded everyone who witnessed it that even the smallest voice can create ripples of change, that gratitude is a gift with enduring impact, and that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the simplest of gestures. A child pointing at a dog and whispering, "Thank you." The town would never forget that day. The courtroom would never feel quite the same. And for Emily, Sarah, Officer Daniels, and Rex, the memory remained alive, a quiet, enduring legacy of courage, compassion, and the recognition of heroism in its purest, most innocent form.